welcome to this video of object diagrams. Before we can go through this video, or before you start reading this video or viewing this video, I would suggest that go through the class diagram video, because the fundamental of object diagrams completely stands on the basis of class diagrams. When we talk about classes, they basically represent the static nature of a system. But finally, classes becomes live when objects are created from them. So basically, if you have a class called a CLS invoice, it is just a prototype, it's just a data type. In order that this CLS invoice comes into live, or we can say it comes into the live software, you need to create objects. And when objects are created, they are created with data. Means, for example, if we have some CLS invoice and it has a property called as invoice number. When you create an object of it, you need to give some invoice number like I001 or I002. So in this sense, when we talk about objects, we are talking about data. So basically, as I said, that classes comes to life only when objects are created from them. So object diagram gives you a representation of a class diagram at any point of time. So they will give you a representation of the class with data. Let's try to understand what exactly I was trying to make a point here. Here's a simple diagram which I have shown. I have shown the class diagram at the top layer and at the top, and corresponding object diagrams at the bottom. So for example, you have a CLS student class here, and below I have shown a simple object diagram of the CLS student. So basically, over here you can see that the class has a property called as student name. But when it comes to when you create an actual object of it, you basically you tie that property with the data. So for example, here the student name is equal to Shiv, because you have created an object of it. Second, you need to give the object name of it. So here I have given Shiv, and then you give a semicolon, and then you say whose object is this basically. So you can see that when you show a class as an object, you basically need to define the value or the representation at any moment of time. In the same way, at the right hand side, you can see that there is a CLS course class, and then I have created corresponding objects to it. I've given the object name, I've given what kind of class, whose object is this, or what kind of this object belongs to what kind of class. And again, for the again object called as English, and with a course name called as Rapid English. So basically, if you look at the class diagram, the object diagram, it's basically representation of the class at any moment of time. Now, one important point to remember is that object diagram should only be drawn to represent complicated relationship between objects, because if you draw your class diagram properly with multiplicity and with all the properties and with proper relationships, you will rarely need an object diagram. But in case that if suppose your project has a lot of complications, and on run times you see that the objects are creating relationships between them, means for instance over here, probably this is not a right example to represent this. I have a CLS student and then I have a CLS course. That's the relationship is already shown or already seen in the class diagram. But it's possible that there are scenarios in project where the relationships are formed when formed on runtime, rather on the structure itself. In the sense, for example, let's say that you have an invoice class and you have a class called as let's say payment. Okay, now probably there is no connection between the invoice class and the payment class. They just stand as a single entity. But what happens is, if suppose the invoice is being paid properly, or if the invoice is printed, then you should use the payment class. So at that moment on runtime, the CLS invoice and the payment forms a relationship. So if suppose you see that the relationships are formed on runtime, then you need to use object diagram. So and I normally see that you can easily show those relationships using class diagrams. So try to avoid object diagrams as far as possible, and only use it when you want to represent complicated relationship between objects.